since you're involved in player development, this is something that I've asked on like every single podcast where we had a guest because it's one of I think the biggest mysteries in the NBA that I'm just trying to figure out, and that is Ben Simmons, and he's been on the topic of the trade rumors regarding the whole James Harden saga, and I want to discuss him as a player in terms of how he fits in with the 76ers and what people actually see in him in terms of being just a superstar. The 76ers have a real chance, especially with Joel Embiid, with his MVP type of season, to really make some moves, and Ben Simmons is a big part of it. And I don't know. A lot of people think of him as a LeBron James-esque type of player, and I've never understood it ever since he's been, from LSU, from even him in Australia to now. What are your opinions on him as a player? Do you see him as a, superstar in this league still, or do you think he's overrated?
Even when it comes to still, I don't know if I've ever seen him as a superstar in the league, just because he when you think of superstars, I would think of guys that it's a step above all-star, right? And Ben Simmons is an all-star, but is he a surefire all-star starter year in and year out? I don't know about that. The superstars I would think is a title more pertain to the LeBron, KDs, where you're a multi-time all-star and you've always been that. And it's kind of undisputable. Your greatness is undisputed. Ben Simmons really has, when it comes to, has he had huge moments? Can you really remember a time where he's taken over a game? Like when it comes to the LeBron comparison, I'd say the biggest difference is, sure, Ben Simmons is the ideal point forward, right? Can get by almost anyone and get to the rim, of course. But when there's such a big question mark on a part of your game, LeBron never had a question mark on anything. There's always been the thing about his free throw shooting and how he's always underperformed in that category. But other than that, even when LeBron first came into the league, at 21, 22 years old, he was taking over games. He was scoring 25 straight points to win games in the fourth quarter. He was doing things like that. So there's definitely levels to this. And while I do think Ben Simmons is a great player and he can take the Sixers very far, who've been playing great all season, especially with Joel Embiid putting forth one of the tightest early MVP races we've seen in a while, with him and Jokic and all these other guys that are putting up great numbers and really leading good teams, where there's no one or two guys. It's not a two-horse race. This year might be way more than that, and we'll see as the year goes on. But Ben Simmons is a very talented player, but he does have a lot of things to do before we can start looking at him that way.
On that topic of the 76ers, I brought up Houston earlier, and of course they were involved in that Brooklyn Nets trade. Give your overall impressions of what do you make of just that massive trade with James Harden. I believe that the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Indiana Pacers were involved as well. Just your overall impressions of where the league goes. Of course, Brooklyn is that's the glamorous kind of highlight of that entire trade. There's those big three there. What did she make of it when I'm sure you saw the tweets from Shams and Woj. What did she make of that, just that big time trade?
I saw the tweets the moment they came out, and I saw them go from like 0 likes to like 10,000 likes in like literally 5 seconds. I refreshed it the moment I saw it, and it went to 10,000 likes. And obviously kept on ballooning past that because it was the biggest news we've heard in months. I would say since the Lakers won the championship, it's probably the biggest thing that's happened in the league since then. So definitely, I was shocked to see it happen, and we always thought that a trade would go down. But the pieces involved, Brooklyn did give up a lot. My opinion on that would be that and this isn't by no means a guaranteed championship, but when your title window is only so big. The Nets have Kyrie and KD under contract, sure, but things can happen, whether it's injury. Well, both players have shown injuries in the past, and even Durant. It's not just the Achilles; it's also back in after his MVP season, he had some problems, and still with Kyrie, you kind of never know you're going to get with him. So they are much closer now to a championship than they were before, just by giving up. You get basically switching carries over for James Harden. The big stuff I would hope they'll figure out at some point, whether it's by DeAndre Jordan showing that he could fill that role for Jared Allen nicely, making a move for a backup center for DeAndre, doing something to help alleviate that. So Kevin Durant's not being asked to kind of score all your points, rebound everything, and can kind of do what he does best more. But the Nets definitely really did what I think a team in their position should do, which is, when you have that title window, when you're the Nets, other than being in the championship when the East was super weak in 2002 and 2003, when have they ever been even close to that? It hasn't happened. If you're the Lakers, maybe you could say, okay, we're gonna get big time free agents. We have all this pedigree. Let's keep our future for the next few years and not go all in right now. Those teams have the luxury of saying that. For a team like the Nets, I feel like that having competitive seasons, especially now when the Knicks are reeling, and me being a native New Yorker and a Knicks fan, I support. I'm not one to kind of hate one team over the other, and obviously I've been a fan of a lot of these guys on the Nets for forever. So it's not that I don't want the Nets to win, but just thinking practically, if the Nets, while the Knicks are reeling right now, right, over the last 10 seasons, haven't played the way they've been playing, and the Nets now come in and maybe they don't even win a championship, but they really go deep in the playoffs and make a few runs for a couple of years. Now the narrative starts to switch a little bit. That's a franchise that needs that to happen, because if they keep doing what they're doing, they'll be stuck as the Knicks' little brother. Not that it's very different than the Lakers and Clippers, where the Lakers have 16 championships, the Clippers never being in a conference finals. There's some differences there for sure, but the Knicks and Nets, the Nets have an actual legit shot at, if they can have some really productive seasons, really growing the brand of their franchise.
So just a follow up real quick. I'm sorry, Matt, just on that point. So are you basically saying, because you just brought up some thoughts in my mind, Madison Square Garden is a hallowed ground and for basketball. And that arena carries a lot of credence to why players want to play there. And so if Brooklyn has a huge line of success over the years, are you basically saying that that's going to be the team of New York? Is it possible that they could just overtake it in like the Barclays Center to just be like the new kind of mecca for basketball? Is that even possible, or do you just see this is too much history just with the Knicks in Madison Square Garden?
So as a Knicks fan, this is basketball heresy, what I'm about to say, and I'll have people that are very upset with me for what I'm going to say. Sure. But the Knicks are, it really is. How many decades have the Knicks been historically relevant in? When you think about that, of course, okay, they won 2 championships in the 70s. Great, of course. If we go further back, not that anyone really cares about that for the most part, but the 50s and 60s still so-so. Sure. But then the 80s, okay, some great scoring seasons with Bernard King. Awesome. And the 90s is where things really heat up, where you have Patrick Ewing and the finals appearance and all that great stuff. Even in those times, though, the historical teams of that generation are, of course, the Chicago Bulls 90s. You would maybe take the Jazz having maybe a better overall decade. Some teams like that. In the 2000s, we all know, in the 2000s, 2010s, we've all seen what the Knicks have been like. So I do think that while Madison Square Garden is considered hallowed ground, and as a Knicks fan, I want to see the Knicks succeed. It's tough from a realistic perspective to look at them and say this is a team that is an all-time great franchise, the way the Lakers, Celtics, and maybe even like we can even go further, the Spurs, the Warriors. There's so many other teams. It's not just really the ring count. It's just how many seasons have you been relevant, historically relevant? How many seasons do you think of when you think of the 2005 season, right? You think of the Spurs winning. You think of what 6, let's say Kobe dropping 81 points. You think of these monumental moments for these historically great franchises. The Knicks don't really come up when you're going back in NBA history. They don't show up as much as they should when looked at in that light. So what I'm saying will upset many people. But when you take a step back and look at it, if you take the name of the New York Knicks off the table and you look at them for what their franchise has actually done in the actual on the court production over the last 50 years. They don't leave as much as to be desired as a lot of these other teams. And if the Nets have that recency bias of, okay, we just won a championship, or we were just, we had an all-time great team, or we have 3 superstars, and, even with Madison Square Garden, no one's coming to the Knicks, but they're coming to the Barclays Center. And okay, we win a championship now. We have more free agents coming in, and they're kind of, maybe this doesn't happen in the next 5 years. Maybe it takes 15, 20 years. But the Nets have the chance to where if they really go all in now and start to see some wins, they might overtake the Knicks. It's really difficult to say that, but it's just when you realistically look at it, it's possible.
John, I think those are all great points, and I wanted to ask you a quick follow-up to that, and then I do have some follow-ups about the Nets specifically. But when you think of like your high school players or players you've coached in recent years, what is their perception of the Knicks? Is there a reverence for Madison Square Garden at all? Because, Justin and I, full disclosure, we're in our mid-30s. We can remember those Patrick Ewing teams pretty well. What's the perception among, high school age kids?
That's the thing. Most of these high school age kids, from what I'm seeing, regurgitate what, let's say, Stephen A. Smith is saying, and saying, "Oh well, the Knicks, the Knicks." And I love Stephen A. Smith, but they're just saying, "Oh well, the Knicks are Madison Square Garden, the Mecca. They bring all these free agents." They kind of focus on that because they've heard it, but do they actually believe it? And how it's kind of difficult to say that they do because they haven't really seen those results mean anything for them in their entire lifetime.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a certain point in time where I think generationally a brand can get tarnished. And if the Knicks haven't passed that, I certainly think they're getting close. Following back up on the Nets, the two most common things that I'd love your perspective on as a coach. The two most common storylines, I mean, before this trade happened, I think a lot of people were saying, you can't bring these three guys together. There's only a certain number of shots you can take per game. These guys, their strengths, at least on the offensive end, I mean, the threat is really in them shooting. I know a lot of people, that's a very unnuanced take, but that's what's being thrown around there. So I'd love your opinion on that. And then also the Nets are 27th. And this is the accumulation of the season, not just what we've seen the last week. 27th in the league on opposing points per game. So obviously, you know, another hot take has been the defense is going to be a problem. They're not going to be able to shore up this defense. They might be handcuffed as far as what moves they can make with this roster, you know, maybe some buyout moves, but really this roster might be fixed for this year. So what are your thoughts on the offensive side of the ball? Are there enough shots to go around to keep everyone happy? And on the defensive side of the ball, do they have enough as it is right now? Or do you think they can, I guess, evolve and adapt as a team and shore up that defense? You know, by the way, Steve Nash, as you know, first-year coach, Mike D'Antoni, an assistant coach, not classically known for his defensive coaching. What are your thoughts on all that?
Definitely just off that last point, Mike D'Antoni is definitely not known for his defensive coaching. I can't tell you how many times that's just I feel bad just because of how often that's brought up about him, and it's just it follows him everywhere.
And I love Mike D'Antoni. I'm not trying to trying to hate.
It's just funny thinking about that. But going back to your original question about there, you know, is there only one basketball? My argument to the whole thing about them they can't win together is why can't they? I understand they might not be able to win together. I understand they'll have to figure some things out. I understand those arguments completely. But to say they can't would mean that they're not, you know, fantastic. They're not fantastic talent. They're not incredibly talented. They're not incredibly intelligent as in terms of basketball players, as people that can hopefully build good relationships with each other. They're personable, and that they've obviously shown that they've whether it's that fact that Harden and Durant have played together before, whether it's the fact that KD and Kyrie are obviously friends. Like there's reasons in terms of those are reasons why they can make it work. Of course, the basketball reasons, I would argue, Harden's never been, outside of his early days in OKC, but that really doesn't hold precedence here. He's never really been a second option or really a support and in any way not the be all and end all for a team. Kyrie Irving's been that before. In 2016, he was that for the Cavs. Kevin Durant, when he was with the Warriors, it wasn't the be all and end all. There were so many other options. The ball was moving beautifully. It was beautiful basketball. And my argument to that would be they've shown that they can do it before. Now, is it more difficult, of course, when it's three guys instead of two? When it's instead of, as Kevin Durant, having just LeBron on your team, you have Kyrie and James Harden, who are both have incredibly high usage? Or how about instead of having Steph Curry, who's an incredibly unselfish player, now things are changing up a little bit. I understand, of course, the problems that we might see with that, but offensively, I would never want to say can't when it comes to this. When it comes to any team, especially with them, though, they definitely have the talent and the basketball IQ and relationship with each other to hopefully make it work. And then on the defensive end of it, just to touch on that a little bit, that's definitely a problem. And when you really have championship aspirations, you can't be 20, below than 15th in anything, let alone 27th. So that definitely is a huge red flag. I'd hope that they can change it up in the coming games. Maybe they start actually getting some consistency together. They understand the schemes they want to run, because they have the kind of offense is a much more talent-based thing where, okay, kind of you can plug James Harden in a little bit, maybe smoother there. Defensively, though, there's so much coaching involved in that and so much in rotations. I definitely can see how that might take them a little bit longer to gel in and say, okay, let's really be on a string here defensively. Where offensively, they're just out talenting people. Defensively, it might take a little bit more to kind of get in tune with one another.
And what do you make of Steve Nash then? Because this is his first year. We're already seeing Kyrie just go MIA. He's back. We don't know if he could go missing again for it. There's a number of reasons. And I'm sure that's going to hurt just the team chemistry. So when it comes playoff time, where I think defense does matter a lot more, where, you have, like you said, there's schemes. There's going to be things where you're not going to be able to get away with stuff you were able to pull off in the regular season compared to the conference finals and in the finals itself. So I guess my question is how do you think Steve Nash, from a coaching perspective, is going to be able to, encounter other, I guess, coaches within the league, such as like a Doc Rivers, who's in the Eastern Conference, or even somebody. I know the Heat are struggling, but I mean, I was telling Matt this: if the Heat get, the eighth spot, and if the Brooklyn Nets get the one spot, hypothetically, I mean, anything can happen in that scenario with Eric Spoelstra. I mean, he's under that tutelage with Pat Riley. Do you see Steve Nash, I guess, having the coaching, I guess, chops to just hang with making adjustments with this team? I know they're super talented, but at this, like you said, I mean, their offense is not going to be able to just bail them out of certain situations against elite teams in the playoffs.
Of course, what I would say about Steve Nash is obviously when you're top 5 in assists, obviously you know the game, and he definitely is a well-respected basketball mind. And I would hope it was really weird to see Kyrie Irving take that time off when there's someone that he respects so much, such as like Steve Nash coaching your team. It was definitely weird to me to see that. And I still don't know what to make of it, and I don't think I ever will. And I don't think anyone ever will. I don't think anyone has everyone kind of just dances around the idea of it because no one has any. They're just saying, "Oh, Kyrie was MIA," but then when they try to explain it, it's like, "Well, I don't know why he was MIA." It's kind of been everyone's reaction to it. But when it comes to Steve Nash as a coach and the way he'll make adjustments, we won't really know. We have no idea of knowing until he gets into his first playoff series. It'll be interesting, like you're saying, with a team like the Heat who are so well coached and who are so disciplined, right? And the reason they made that run to the finals was not because they had the most talent on the floor. It's because they worked very beautifully together. So that like the Heat are the definition of a team. The Nets aren't a team yet because they all just came together, and it's going to take some time. If they're not a team by the time the playoffs roll around, they do have the potential to get upset. I mean, I would hope for their sake that they're able to figure that out, because that'll be whether it's a first round or a second round collapse would be absolutely catastrophic for them. But when it comes to Steve Nash, we'll have to see what he does then. What happens when you can't contain Jimmy Butler, let's say, when it's the Heat? What happens when you're in the second round against the Sixers and Joel Embiid gets hot? There's so many things that, and Joel Embiid specifically being a big and the Nets not having that kind of size in their depth chart. What do you do as a coach when you someone's going off on you and you don't have the tools to just get rid of that problem? You have to find a way to, as a team, solve the problem, not just, okay, I'll just put in this one guy and he'll fix it. Because coaching's so much more than subs, right? There's so much more. When young people, or even me, let's say before I started coaching, I always thought, okay, well, this is easy. You just play the 5 best players, which is the furthest thing from the truth. The starters aren't the 5 best players, or the 5 players that play the best together. But you think to yourself, oh, put in the 5 best guys. The 6th best guy goes in for the guy that's playing the worst of the 5 guys, and we just go that from there. So if we're getting killed on the boards, we put in our big guy. Like that. It's such a simple way to think of it, but that's not how it works at all. If a problem like that happens, Steve Nash has to adjust on the fly, quarter to quarter, maybe minute by minute, as to how do we solve this problem. And as a basketball mind going into it, having no coaching experience, we have to kind of look at him the way we look at anybody else, but obviously with a higher level of respect, being that he had the career that he had, and in the manner that he kind of had that great career. So my response to what we think of Steve Nash is just kind of, we have to wait and see, and hopefully he does what everyone kind of expects him to do because of that great history.
Hey, thanks for checking out Hoopsology. If you had any thoughts on the topic we just discussed, we'd love to hear them in the comments section below. If you liked the video, please consider liking and sharing the video. It really helps us out. We appreciate it, and we will see you guys for the next video.